Well, hello everyone. It's time again for another episode of Mondays with Mundy. And that's me, Jim Mundy, the historian for the Union League Legacy Foundation. Uh, as you've noticed over the last year, I like talking about League members who are inventive and creative and imaginative and have yet invented some pretty interesting things. After all, think of the paper towel. Where would we be without paper towels? How about the first, functioning and electric motor car, the Electrobag. Where would we be without and look at cars nowadays, right, and stuff like that. So I have another League member I want to talk about. His name is William Sellers, and he did something in 1864 that has had an effect on our lives ever since. So you'll see what I'm talking about. Let's share the screen and get started, okay? All right. And you can probably see that, but I need for that to go like that, and then I need to do that. And we do that. All right, so today's episode is called The Turn of the Screw. Not very inventive or creative, but where you get to get the message, right? And that's all that counts. All right. So screws have been around for thousands of years. I mean, Archimedes created the first functional screw that we know of, but it was used to move water from a lower surface to an upper surface and things like that. But the Greeks and Romans were using screws for olive presses and wine presses, such as the one on the left-hand side. And then in the Middle Ages, in the 15th century, along comes Gutenberg and the printing press. And again, that needed a screw. And you can see that on the right-hand side. But screws didn't exist in any uniform way at all. Everybody created their own threads, their own screws, their length, width, size, the whole 9 yards. But as the Industrial Revolution took hold in Western Europe, it was getting to be a problem. Think of England in the early 1800s, as it industrializes, textiles, shipyards, the whole 9 yards, and of course, railroads. And this is called an erecting shop. It's where they build the steam locomotives and things like that. But every different steam locomotive manufacturer made their own screws and bolts and nuts. And what happens if your engine's out running somewhere and it breaks down because a bolt broke? And how do you get a new one? You have to go back to the manufacturer to get it. Even if you're 500 miles away. And obviously that wasn't a good thing. So the railroads themselves wanted standardization because they were trying to standardize themselves in terms of gauge and all that kind of stuff. Anyway, so in 1841. An English machine tool maker named Joseph Whipper comes along and he decides to standardize screw threads. And he does it. And you can see an example in the upper right-hand corner. All right. You can see that both the point and the valley or the gully are both rounded, but you'll see that there's a 55-degree radius between the points. All right. But it worked. And it worked really, really well. I mean, of course, like everything, it takes time to adopt and stuff like that. But this became known as the British Standard Whitworth screw thread, and it eventually reached the United States. But again, not everybody was using it. Everybody was still making their own screws, their own nuts and bolts, and the threads are always different, and you still have the same problem. And that's where the hero of our story comes in, right? As he was a League member, his name was William Sellers. That is he. You can see he was born in 1824 in Upper Darby, PA, to an old Quaker family. Upper Darby was originally a Quaker settlement. Sellers was educated at home. And when he was in his mid-teens, he was apprenticed out to an uncle named John William Poole in Wilmington, Delaware, in his machine shop. And that's where he first learned about machine tool making. And when he was 20 years old, he ends up in Providence, Rhode Island, working with Fairbanks, Bancroft and Company, Edward Bancroft. And 3 years later, they will come down to Philadelphia and opened up Bancroft and Sellers here in Philadelphia. All right. 1848, Sellers, the Bancroft Sellers Company is up and running. By 1856, they're successful. They were from Kensington originally, then they moved to 16th and Hamilton. In today's world, that is the site basically covered by the old, by Smith, Klein and French, but wasn't back then though. And Hamilton, by the way, runs parallel to Spring Garden Street, just so you know, just a block or two below. So Sellers, all right, get back to Sellers. So here he is. He's back in Philadelphia. He's becoming a very successful machine tool manufacturer, but he's facing the same problem that everybody else was. Everybody's screws are different. And again, Philadelphia at this point is becoming it is already actually the major manufacturing city in America. So what's good in Philadelphia is going to be good for the rest of the country. So let's see now. So what else we have here? So, all right. So Sellers, he joins the League in early January of 1864, the same year that he became the president of the Franklin Institute. And he became a member of that in 1847. And the Franklin Institute at this point in time is the country's leading scientific and research body. And it was quite an honor to become a member of it as well. So Sellers, now actually Mr. Bancroft died in 1856, so it's now Sellers and Company. He's on his own. He is becoming a major industrialist in the city itself, and he decides it's time to create a standardized American screw thread, and that's what he does in 1864 in a paper before the board of the Franklin Institute. All right, September the 15th, I believe, and is adopted. And slowly but surely, it's going to become a national standard. And you can see the thread that he invents up top. Now, he flattened the point and he flattened the gully. And he also opened the width a little bit to 60 degrees from 55. And apparently that made all the difference in the world, because now it became easier for American manufacturers of all different kinds of skills to create standardized through threads. And now he's up and running. And you can, think about it, folks. Geez, that's an amazing thing to think about. So, and this became known as either the Sellers screw thread or the Franklin Institute screw thread, for instance, and it was now going to become standardized. But again, it would take time. And that's because change just takes time. Now, and here you can see a good example of it too. So you have the Whitworth thread in the middle, and then you have the Sellers thread at the bottom. You can see the difference right there. All right. Okay, back to railroads, because after all, they were becoming the biggest corporations in America at this point in time. And Philadelphia was the home to the country's largest railroad in the 19th century. Actually, both of them, the Philadelphia and Reading, and then the Pennsylvania Railroad. And this is the Pennsylvania Railroad map, so you can see how big it was even just in the 19th century. So if you're the Pennsylvania Railroad and you have thousands of locomotives and you're spread all over the eastern US, because eventually the railroad would go to Chicago and Cincinnati, St. Louis, Buffalo, New York. You can't be using different threads on different machines, right? And that was the issue that Baldwin Locomotive also had, because they're the country's largest locomotive manufacturer, and they are located right at Broad and Spring Garden Street. Okay, so there is Spring Garden on the far right-hand side, Hamilton, Pennsylvania, and the Reading Railroad on the south side. Because if the railroads need standardization, then so do locomotive manufacturers. And Matthias Baldwin Locomotive Manufacturer was the largest one in the country. And that's a 19th century version. And this is the William Sellers factory at 16th and Hamilton. Okay, that's an older 19th century engraving. And then we have more modern images of Baldwin Locomotive. You can see how big it was. Okay, it took up 3 blocks. And then this is Sellers, right? And you can see there's 16th Street on the right, and there is the Reading Railroad on the left-hand side. And here's the genius of both Sellers and Baldwin, because Baldwin built around Sellers, and Sellers built his manufacturing plant inside the Baldwin plant. So if you look at those on the left-hand side, you see those 3 empty squares. At the top, you have the U.S. Mint, and then you've got 2 empty squares there. Okay, Hamilton, 16th, that's William Sellers and Company. So Baldwin has an immediate supply of everything that Sellers is making, because he made all kinds of industrial machines, but he also had screws. All right, pretty smart thinking. That's just really ingenious when you think about it. So now, and there's William Sellers. Okay, give an example of the different kinds of machines that he made. All right, it wasn't just screws. Okay, planes. You name it, he made it. All right, and here, and then in 1868, Sellers founded the Edgemoor Iron Company, and that's Edgemoor, Delaware. You can see the plant there, kind of in the upper right-hand corner. And Edgemoor would become the supplier for all the industrial steel that was used in the 1876 centennial celebration here in Philadelphia. And so here is I thought appropriately, machinery hall. All right, all that structural steel in there. I mean, for the whole kit and caboodle was made by Edgemoor through William Sellers. Okay, and this is an example of a planing machine that was on display at Machinery Hall that day. And actually, would you believe that Edgemoor also produced all of the structural material for the Brooklyn Bridge that opened in 1883, except for the cables that did not come from Edgemoor? But you can see how Sellers is just a manufacturing genius in a lot of ways. In addition to that, in 1873, he became the president of the Midvale Steel Company in the Nicetown section of Philadelphia. Today, it's the site of the big SEPTA depot for buses and trains and things like that. But Midvale would become the first steel manufacturer to provide the quality of material needed for U.S. naval ship guns, for instance, and tubes for cannons and things like that. So Sellers is in the middle of this manufacturing boom that's going on in Philadelphia, and all because he had a brain and he knew how to standardize things. So this is Sellers in his older land. Now, in the meantime, Sellers became members of all these different societies. Let me just read one or two of them because it really was impressive. All right. So, and by 1864, he was a member of the American Philosophical Society here in Philadelphia. And then in 1873, the Academy of Natural Sciences. He was members of the Institute of Mechanical Engineers of Great Britain, the Iron and Steel Institute of Great Britain. He was a member of the Société d'Encouragement pour l'Industrie Rationnelle in Paris. And at the close of the Paris Exposition in 1899, he was awarded the Chevalier de la Légion d'Honneur, and that honor was conferred upon him. He was also a founding member of the American Society of Civil Engineers in 1880. So he was a man who not only had an impact in Philadelphia and America, but in the world itself. And he is an older gentleman, and by the time he died, in 1905, he had over 90 patents to his name, and he had a few that were still pending at the time of his death. So a man that nobody's ever heard about, a man that, how often do we think about, geez, how do we get standardized screws, right? But now you know. So it was a Union League member, William Sellers, who came up with the idea in America of standardizing screw threads. And this is Mr. Sellers' final resting place. It's a Quaker cemetery, but these are rather large stones for a Quaker cemetery, but nonetheless, that is he. Given how important he was, it's a very plain and simple headstone nonetheless. And the next time you go to the hardware store and you buy something that has a thread on it, think of William Sellers. Okay? All right. That's today's show, folks. Hope you enjoyed it. You learned that another league member just added something else to this country's history in a different way. So thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed it. Hope you've all been vaccinated, because that's how we're all going to get better. And we'll see you the next time around. So stay safe, everybody, and stay well. Bye.